Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kavita Scranton, and I'm a Senior Scientific Editor at the Cell Press Journal Immunity. I'll be talking to you today about how to prepare your manuscript for publication in top journals. So this is a quick overview of my talk. I'll start with some brief information on the Cell Press portfolio of journals. And we're fortunate to have a global audience here with us today, so I'll have some data on Cell Press in the Middle East region. I'll tell you a little more about immunity and my path to the journal, and then I'll spend the bulk of the time talking about the editorial process and manuscript preparation, as well as providing some tips for reviewers. I'll end with some information on other initiatives at Cell Press, and we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end of the talk. So please feel free to use the questions box to enter your questions throughout the webinar, and I'll try to answer as many as I can at the end of the session. So Cell Press was launched by Ben Lewin in 1974 at MIT Press, and Cell Press was founded by Ben Lewin in 1986. Cell Press is based in Cambridge, Mass., but we have editors all over the world, including in China and Europe. Cell Press has about 100 PhD-level full-time scientific editors working in-house. The flagship journal for the Cell Press family is the journal Cell, which is a broad-scope journal that publishes in the biological sciences. And there are a number of other more specialized journals that are part of the Cell Press family, including Neuron, Immunity, Cancer Cell, etc., with a total of 25 primary research journals. In addition to primary research journals, Cell Press also has 16 trends journals that publish review articles in various fields, with the newest addition to the family, Trends in Chemistry, shown here at the end in the bottom right. Cell Press also has 10 society partnership journals that are shown here, including AJHG, Stem Cell Reports, and Biophysical Journal and Molecular Plant. So you're most likely familiar with Cell as a publisher in the biological sciences. And in this top row, I'm showing you some of the journals in the family that publish immunology research, including our parent journal Cell, Immunity, Cell Reports and Cell Reports Medicine, and Trends in Immunology. So Cell Reports is a broad scope journal that publishes a lot of strong immunology papers, and Cell Reports Medicine is a new journal that publishes in the translational and clinical space, including immunology. And Trends in Immunology publishes reviews in the immunological field. So what you may not know is that in addition, Cell Press has expanded into the physical sciences and is now an all sciences publisher. We launched a number of new journals over the past several years that are at the level of Cell. So for example, Med focuses on clinical and translational work, Chem focuses on chemistry, Matter on material sciences, One Earth focuses on global environmental change and sustainability science, Jewel on sustainable energy, and Patterns on data science. And each of these top-level journals will also have additional journals that you can cascade down through, similar to the path that I showed above, such as Cell Reports Physical Sciences and Cell Reports Medicine. So this is just a summary of some of our most recent launches, many of which are open access journals. And this includes Med, Patterns, Cell Reports Medicine, iSciences, STAR Protocols, The Innovation, HGG Advances, and Cell Reports Physical Sciences. So most Cell Press journals are subscription-based, but we have a number of open access options as well as some hybrid options. And you can find more information about these and other Cell Press journals at cell.com. So for this webinar, we have a particular emphasis on the Middle East region, so I wanted to highlight a few of the Cell Press research output components for this audience group. So since 2009, there's been a growth trend for research coming out of the Middle East region that's being published in Cell Press journals. This figure shows you the number of articles from the Middle East region published in Cell Press journals over time, and you can see that there's been a consistent increasing trend in publications from this region over the past 10 years. This map illustrates the research output within Cell Press in the Middle East region, with a number of articles listed with their geographic location over the last 10 years. And this is a summary of the universities and institutes in each area that have the highest research output in Cell Press. So there were over 350,000 downloads of Cell Press articles in the Middle East region in 2019. And the most downloaded journals included Cell, Cell Reports, Neuron, Molecular Cell, Current Biology, and Biophysical Journal. So next I want to tell you a little more about Immunity and my path to the journal. Immunity was founded in 1994. We actually just turned 25 last year. And the cover that you see on the left is from our 25th anniversary issue from April 2019. And it's a mosaic that was generated using photos that were submitted from immunology labs around the world to highlight our authors, reviewers, and readers. The journal was launched initially with a group of academic editors at MIT and Harvard, and it transitioned to an in-house editorial system with Cell Press in 2005. The goal of the journal is to publish exciting research in immunology, and this includes basic science, cancer immunotherapy, neuroimmunology, vaccines, human immunology, microbiota, immunometabolism, and much, much more. And we publish in a variety of formats, including primary research articles, resources, reports, reviews, previews, and voices. And we have 4 full-time editors who all have PhDs in immunology along with postdoctoral experience. So just a little about me. I started doing research in college, and I graduated from Tufts University with a BS in biology. I worked as a technician in an immunology lab for a few years before getting my PhD in immunology at UMass Medical School. I then went on to do my postdoctoral research at the Broad Institute, and I joined Immunity as a scientific editor in 2015, so I've been here for about 5.5 years. So next I'll discuss the role of the editor and the editorial process. So the editor is the advocate for your paper, and he or she will oversee the review process and communicate with authors and reviewers, and tries to make the process as fast, efficient, and fair as possible. We also keep up with advances in the field by reading broadly across other journals and attending scientific meetings, and we guide the strategic development of the journal and of Cell Press. In addition to handling primary research papers, we also commission other pieces for the journal, such as reviews that summarize the literature on a particular topic, previews that highlight our papers, as well as other types of content. So next I want to take you briefly through what happens to your paper after you submit it. So after a new paper is submitted, the abstract is usually read by all of the journal's editors, and it's assigned to one handling editor. And this person will be your primary point of contact throughout the process. The handling editor will read the full paper and background and will discuss the paper with the rest of the editorial team. A decision will be made about whether to reject the paper without review or to send it out for external review. If the paper is rejected, then the handling editor will write the decision letter and explain the rationale for the rejection. And the editor may offer some transfer options within Cell Press for journals that may be a better fit. If the paper is selected for external peer review, then the handling editor will coordinate the review process. He or she will select experts in the field to review the work and tries to ensure that the reviewers are timely. After all reviews are in, the reviewers are then given some time to read the other reviewers' comments and provide any additional feedback to the editor in a process that we call cross-review that many Cell Press journals use. There may then be additional discussions between the editor and the reviewers, and the handling editor will discuss the paper and all of the feedback with the rest of the editorial team, and they'll come to a mutual decision. The editor will then write to the author to explain the decision, and if the paper is rejected without the option to resubmit, you can discuss transfer options with the editor. Now, if the editors invite a revision, then the author and the editor may discuss a revision plan in more detail, and the authors will then go on to revise and resubmit the paper. And it then goes through the process again, the review process again, and a final decision is usually made at this stage on whether to accept or reject the paper. At Cell Press, we try to limit papers to only one round of major revisions. If the manuscript is rejected, again, you can consider your transfer options and discuss these with the editor. But hopefully your manuscript will be accepted and you'll get the chance to celebrate. So next I wanted to take you through some common myths and misconceptions that I hear frequently when I'm out in the community. So the first myth is that editors don't really have time to read every paper all the way through in detail. And this is completely untrue. The truth is that every single paper is read in full and in detail by the handling editor. We never make decisions on papers that we haven't actually read. Another myth is that you have to reformat your paper for every new journal during the initial submission process. And this isn't true. All Cell Press journals, and actually many other journals, are format agnostic at the initial submission stage. So we don't care what format your references are in, or that your abstract is the exact right length, or that your methods are in the journal's format. Just make sure that all the information necessary to evaluate the paper is there, and that's all we need. If the paper clears peer review, we'll ask you to make some formatting changes when we get ready to publish the paper. But at this initial stage, we don't want to make anything more difficult for the authors. We know that it takes a long time to prepare a paper, and there's no point in making you do this over and over again, especially if the paper doesn't end up going out for peer review. So we want to make things as simple as possible for you. So another myth is that the editors will actually send the paper to the people that you exclude as reviewers. And I assure you that at Cell Press, we always honor reviewer exclusions. You're allowed to exclude 3 reviewers, and we absolutely will not send the paper to these people. So it's to your benefit to make use of this option to exclude anyone that you think may have a conflict of interest or who you think may not judge your work fairly. Another myth is that you have to do every single experiment that the reviewers ask for, or your paper won't be accepted. And this is also often not the case. Your decision letter will contain some guidance on the most important issues that need to be addressed. But if you have concerns with some of the experiments that the reviewers are asking for, please email your editor to discuss. We don't want you spending a year doing an experiment that will only minimally impact the main message of the paper, or struggling to do an experiment that you know is not technically feasible because the reviewers asked for it. So please reach out to us if you have concerns, and we're happy to discuss, and we may consult the reviewers to come to a more reasonable revision plan. And finally, a lot of people think that they have to be from a well-known lab to get their paper reviewed. And this also isn't true. Our goal at the journal is to publish the best science. We don't give special preference based on what lab you came from or your lab's reputation. For most of the papers that I sent out to review, I actually don't know the authors. And I love when I get to help a new PI publish the first paper from their lab. So then what do editors look for in a paper? It's easy to read a paper and find the flaws. I'm sure that you all do this during Journal Club, where you sort of pick a paper apart and try and come out with what they should have done or what's missing. And no paper is perfect, including the papers that we publish. And there's always going to be something more that could be done. So what we try to do when we read papers is read them for what's exciting rather than focusing on the flaws. We're looking for potential here. So does the paper ask an interesting question? Is this a question that's important for the field that people would be interested in? Does it advance the field and give us a new perspective on a topic? Does it provide mechanistic insight and explain sort of how things work? Are the experiments logically designed and well controlled? And are the models that are being used appropriate? What's the physiological relevance of the findings? Under what setting is this process occurring, and how important is this process? So these are some of the things that we're looking for when we evaluate a new manuscript. So now I want to move on to some tips on how to write your paper. So the first step is to choose the right journal. You shouldn't just submit your paper to the highest impact journal in your field. This will only elongate the time it takes to get your work published, as you'll likely end up bouncing from journal to journal, and this can be very frustrating. Instead, think objectively about your work and the audience that would appreciate it best. Is it a very broad advance that you're reporting that would be appreciated by those across multiple fields? If so, maybe a broad journal like Cell is appropriate. Is it a major advance for the field, but maybe not across multiple fields? In that case, maybe a more specialized field-specific journal would be a better fit. It's a good idea to read the aims and scope pages for your target journals and to spend some time reading the journal of interest. How does your work compare to what you see published in the journal? If you look at the references that you cite in your paper, that may also help you decide what the best fit for your work might be. The right journal will have editors that know the field well, can identify the right reviewers, and will help guide you through the process. So why should you consider publishing with Cell Press? Cell Press has a number of journals across a wide area of disciplines and impact factors. Cell Press journals are all staffed by full-time in-house professional editors who have PhDs in the relevant field, and most also have postdoctoral training as well, so we're all scientists. We act as an impartial surrogate for the broad readership and are there to help you through the process from the initial evaluation of the paper to publication and post-publication promotion. Because being an editor is our primary job, we have the time to actively engage with authors and reviewers and to provide timely, unbiased decisions. We also maintain high scientific standards during the review process and make team-based editorial decisions. In addition, Cell Press will help promote your work to increase its visibility and reach with features like previews, audio or video interviews, press releases, and social media. So if you're still not quite sure what journal is the best fit for your paper, one helpful option is to submit what we call a pre-submission inquiry. And this involves submitting the title, abstract, and possibly a cover letter. And we'll give you some quick feedback on whether we think the paper could be a good fit for the journal in terms of the level of advance and scope, et cetera. So you can submit a pre-submission inquiry to multiple journals to help you find the one that's the best fit for your work. And this is often the most helpful when you're finishing up the work, so you can get a sense of any final experiments you might want to do. Maybe you submit a pre-submission inquiry to immunity, and we say, this is really interesting, but, we would really need some mechanistic insight to make this, a good candidate for us. So then you could spend that last month trying to flesh out that mechanistic side of things. So we can provide you some guidance in that sense. If the paper is already ready to go and written, it may be faster to just submit it to the journal so that we can read the full paper, as our initial decisions are usually made in about 3 to 5 days. Another option is co-submissions. So you're allowed to submit your full paper to 2 cell-press journals simultaneously. To do this, you would submit the paper to one journal and indicate in the cover letter that you'd like the paper to be co-considered at the other journal. This can be helpful if your paper is in the scope of 2 different journals. For example, if it's an immunometabolism paper, and you feel like it could fit well both at immunity or cell metabolism. In this case, both journals would independently read and evaluate the manuscript. You get a handling editor at each journal. And if both journals wanted to review, the editors would work together to select one set of 3 reviewers who will look at the paper for both journals. And I'm happy to talk about this more if there are any questions. So please enter your questions in the box, and we can discuss more at the end if you'd like. So now on to some writing tips. A good paper will tell a story. It'll explain the background, the main question that's being addressed, and take the readers on a journey towards understanding what was done and what the findings imply. Don't think about writing the paper as a chore that you have to do at the end after you finish your experiments. Think about it as a way to share your work with your field. Your paper should essentially walk the reader through the rationale for the work. What's the relevant background? What's the question you're addressing? How did you do this work, and what did you find? This isn't a hyped sales job or a sales pitch, but it is important to bring readers along with you. And remember that not everyone is going to be an expert in your field. So if you think about your readers, many of them will not know your field or your work as well as you do. So think about that broader perspective and how you would convey the importance and interesting aspects of your work to someone who may not know everything that you know. It's often good to get feedback on your paper from colleagues, but also from someone outside your immediate field who can provide fresh eyes on the work. For non-native English speakers, there are a range of language editing services that are available to help ensure that your writing style is clear and concise. A good paper will bring the reviewers along with them, but try not to hide caveats or missing links. Be upfront about these and try to integrate them into the narrative. Moving on to the cover letter. The cover letter is only seen by the editor. The reviewers don't see the cover letter, so this is your chance to communicate directly with the editor. The cover letter should briefly summarize the question that you're addressing and your main findings. You shouldn't just paste in your abstract. It should explain a little bit about the background, question you're addressing, how the work advances the field, and this is also where you should mention any related manuscripts or competitive situations. If you're worried about a particular paper that was published that may undercut your work, you can mention why you feel like your paper is an advance over that work. Maybe your experimental strategy is better, or maybe your findings conflict with theirs because you used more patients or more advanced techniques. This is also where you should mention your reviewer suggestions and exclusions, and I encourage you to take the opportunity to do both. Reviewer suggestions are also helpful to us because it gives us a sense of who you think is well qualified to review your paper. And the cover letter is also your chance to show your excitement about the work. Although we don't allow priority claims or novelty claims in the main paper, you can highlight these aspects candidly in the cover letter and tell us, this is the first time anyone has done X, Y, Z, or this is the most, the highest resolution anyone's ever looked at this topic in, things like that. So this is where you can express that and tell us why you think that your manuscript is, important and should be considered further at the journal. So moving on to the title and abstract. The title and abstract are the most visible parts of your journal. And once the paper is published, most readers will decide whether or not they're going to read your paper based solely on these two aspects of the work. So the title should be declarative, and it should state the main conclusion of the work. For example, we see a lot of descriptive titles in the format of, the role of gene X in exhausted T cells. But this doesn't tell us much about what you really found. Is gene X promoting or inhibiting exhaustion? How is it working? A more declarative title might be something like gene X promotes T cell exhaustion during chronic infection by inhibiting gene Y. This gives the reader a much more clear picture of the work and what the main advance is. The abstract should start by setting the stage for the work with a little bit of background and by stating the question that you're addressing. But the abstract should focus mainly on what you've done in the paper and shouldn't contain, half of it shouldn't be the background essentially. So it should focus on what was done, what you found, and it should make it clear what models were used. So are you doing this in mice, humans? Are you using genetic models? Is there some disease relevance? And remember that you're writing for a broad audience. So again, you know every detail of the work in the background really well, but try and take a step back to think about your audience and try not to make assumptions about what your audience knows, and make sure you define all abbreviations. So be accurate and avoid overstating, and end with a summary sentence that states the implications of the work for the field. Next, the introduction. The introduction should walk the reader through the background for the work, and it's important to keep your audience in mind again. Are you writing for a broad scope journal or a more specialized journal? Either way, it's important to highlight what we already know and to try not to go overboard on citing your own work, and also to highlight the gaps in our knowledge and clearly state the question that you're addressing in the work. End with a brief summary of the main findings of the manuscript. The results section will likely be the bulk of your paper, and there are a few things that you can do to help the readers follow along with your results. So one thing is to make sure that subsection headings state the main conclusion of the section, and that the first sentence of each section should help explain the logic and rationale for the set of experiments. Explain the models that you use in detail. Don't assume that the readers know which cell type your particular CRE driver deletes in. And each section should end with a summary sentence that states the main conclusion of that section. Try not to overstate the significance of the findings, and be concise and clear, and try to avoid field-specific jargon and priority or novelty claims. And just because a reviewer allows 7 figures and 55,000 characters, don't feel like you have to stretch your paper to meet those limits. Tell the story simply and concisely, and think carefully about what data to put in the main figures versus the supplement. Don't just use the supplemental information as a data dumping ground where you put everything in that you did. Think about carefully what's necessary to tell the story and what's helpful to explain what you did and what you found. Moving on to the discussion, this is where you can put your findings into the context of the rest of the field. So this shouldn't be a rehashing of the results. So you shouldn't restate everything that you did in the results section, but instead you should integrate your findings into the rest of the field and make sure to cite relevant papers that relate to your work. Reviewers will notice omissions of important work, especially if you're trying to sort of downplay something that might impact the novelty of your work. Reviewers are often aware of this literature, and so it's more helpful to actually just come out and discuss those things candidly and explain why you think your work is an advance over that previous work. It's also good to highlight any caveats to your work or alternative interpretations, and to provide any explanations for results that may contradict previously published work. You can also discuss the implications for the work and the next steps for the field, and any future plans that you have for the work. So next, moving on to the figure legends. Figure legends should also contain titles that state the main conclusion of the figure, and they should clearly describe what was done and what's being shown, as well as how many samples were analyzed and how many independent experiments were performed. The legend should also provide information on statistics, but they should not contain conclusions or data interpretations. Those are for any of that stuff should go into your results and discussion, but it doesn't belong in your legends. And in terms of the methods, several years ago, CellPress implemented a specific methods format to promote reporting, transparency, and reproducibility, and this is called STAR methods. And the methods section and references section do not count towards the character count of the paper, so make sure you're as clear as possible about what was done. Don't just refer to other papers for methods, but instead provide the details for all experiments in the methods section. And as I mentioned, when you first submit your paper, you're not required to follow this formatting. So there's no need to include STAR methods at your initial submission unless you'd like to. But either way, all methods should be described in full, and any necessary data sets such as RNA-seq, et cetera, should also be provided with links so that the reviewers can access the data. So I've just given you a lot of information about how to write a good paper, but I want to stress that while this is all important, we're really focused on the science. And the most important thing is to make sure that your paper is scientifically sound and that it's done well. So not having a perfect title or an amazing abstract will not kill your paper. The editors are going to read the full paper no matter what, and we're focused on the science. However, writing your paper well will ensure that your message comes across clearly to both the editor and reviewers. And it can, and remember also that reviewers decide whether or not to review a paper just based on seeing the title and abstract. In addition, if your paper is sloppy, if it's got a lot of errors in the figures, in referencing, or if it's written poorly, this can also impact the reviewer's confidence in the data. So check and double check your figures to ensure there are no errors or duplications, and keep your records organized in case the editors or reviewers request to see the raw data. Once a paper is published, people are also more likely to read a paper if it's clearly written and if they can easily understand what's going on. So next I'll talk briefly about how decisions are made. So this is an example of the recommendations from 3 reviewers on 3 different papers, followed at the end by the decision letter that I sent to the authors. So it's rare that reviewers actually all agree on what should happen to a manuscript. So it's almost never an easy tally of yeses and nos that determines the next step for the paper. You can see here several examples of reviewer recommendations. And in the first case and second case, you can see that both got an accept, reject, and minor revisions from each of the reviewers, but the final decision was different in those cases. One received minor revisions and one received a major revisions decision. And then the final example, you can see there was definitely some discord here, minor revisions, accept, and major revisions, and that paper ended up being rejected. So every paper is unique, and what you don't see here is that there are often multiple additional discussions between the editors and reviewers, and often the editors and authors before a final decision is made. So to make a decision, the editor integrates all of the feedback on the paper, including the reviewer's comments and their expertise, as well as the editor's assessment of the paper and the feedback from the rest of the editorial team, as well as the nature of anticipated revisions and the feasibility of these experiments, along with looking at the conceptual advance and general interest level of the paper. So as I mentioned, we often get additional feedback from the reviewers once they've read the other reviewers' comments. And occasionally we may also consult another independent expert in the field on specific issues. We also sometimes ask for a response from the authors to the reviewers' comments before making a decision. But overall, this is an editorial decision, and we will and often do overrule reviewers. So some of the questions that we ask when making a decision is, how close is the present state of the manuscript to the standard of the journal? So is it very interesting and close to the standards of the journal in the field? In that case, we would likely invite a revision. Is it very interesting but too preliminary? In that case, we would want to decide, how much can the authors do? Is it reasonable to ask them to do this, additional work to try and get into the journal, or would it be better if they took the paper elsewhere? Is the question that they're addressing interesting and important, but the data don't support the conclusions? In that case, depending on how far off it is, it may be reasonable for the authors to try and bolster those data to try and support the conclusions better. Or are there questions to the level of interest in the findings, in which case it may be more suitable for another journal. We also look at the nature of revisions that would be required. So are the revisions significant but very specific So is there a clear path forward we could see? Or are the revisions so extensive that would essentially mean constructing a new manuscript? If there are multiple conclusions being questioned, then this may be a situation where it's better to revise for a different journal. And if the revisions seem like they could change the main message of the study, that's another concern for us. That may mean that we may not want to continue forward with the paper. So what do you do after you receive a decision? Once you receive your decision, you should read the reviews carefully and then formulate a plan based on the scientific issues and what will best help improve the study. So find the constructive points and identify the underlying issues. If you have concerns with some of the reviewer requests, contact your editor to discuss. When you write your point-by-point response, copy all of the reviewer comments exactly as written and respond to them respectively. Things like page numbers and line numbers and highlighting in the text can help speed up the re-review process and will often make reviewers happier. If your paper was rejected editorially or after review, you have the option to appeal the decision. It's best to give yourself a day or two before writing to the editor, because I know that emotions can be running pretty high when you get that decision. But it's good to take some time and think about what you want to say. And when you do write, focus your appeal on the science and any new data that you may have, and try to avoid any personal attacks on either the editors or the reviewers. I mentioned earlier that if your paper gets rejected, you have the option to transfer within Cell Press. So the goal of the transfer process is to help you find a place to publish your paper within Cell Press as quickly and smoothly as possible. And this is entirely author-driven, but the editors can help and guide you if you desire that. So we can often help you by suggesting other journals that might be a good fit. If you give us permission and want us to talk to another journal about your paper, we can also do that and try and sort of highlight why we think the paper is really strong, even though it might not be for us, but why it might be a really good fit for a different journal. And you can transfer whether or not a paper was sent out for peer review at the initial journal. So if it was rejected without review at Immunity, for example, you could transfer that to another journal. And if it was rejected with review, after review, you could also transfer that paper. If the paper is transferred after peer review at the original journal, the reviews and reviewer identities are transferred with the paper if you'd like. You can also ask for a fresh start at the new journal. So let's say you got reviewed at Cell and your reviews were great and you want to address those reviews. Cell did not offer a revision, but you feel like you can address those reviews and you want to transfer to Immunity. So you can do that and submit your paper with a point-by-point response to Immunity to those Cell reviews, and we'll consider those reviews in our decision. However, if you got reviewed at Cell, and let's say you don't like the reviewers' comments, you feel like they missed the point, or you just want another fresh set of eyes, you can transfer the paper to us and tell us, listen, this was reviewed at Cell, but we'd like a fresh take. We'd like a fresh start. And so in that case, if we decide to review it, we'll go to 3 new reviewers. We won't look at the previous reviews or decisions, so that won't impact our view of your paper. And we'll sort of essentially start that process over and give you a fresh take. And you have the ability to revise your paper before you transfer to the next journal. So you can either revise based on the reviews you have and then transfer, or if you'd like, you can transfer with a point-by-point response and ask the journal editor, this is our plan, what do you think? And have some additional discussions before you actually submit the version that you want to send out to review. But either way, it's helpful to contact the journal that you want to transfer with any questions. So what happens after your paper clears peer review? So once your paper clears peer review and is pre-accepted, depending on the journal, it might go through a round of scientific editing to help improve the clarity of the scientific message. And this focuses especially on the title, abstract, e-talk highlights, methods, key versus table, etc. And we'll also check for formatting issues. And once all issues are addressed, the paper will be accepted officially. Once your paper is accepted, it'll undergo copy editing, formatting, and figure styling with the production staff, and you'll receive the proofs. And once everything's finalized, we'll get it published online as soon as possible. And we'll also help promote your work and improve the visibility of your work with previews and other visual content, as well as press releases and posts on our social media channels and promotion on our journal websites to increase the reach of the article. So just a few tips on how to be a good reviewer. So remember that the work that you're reviewing is confidential. So don't discuss the work with anyone who's not involved in the reviewing process with you. Disclose any conflicts ASAP when you're invited to review. So a conflict of interest would be, you've published, we usually will check to see if you've published with the authors or not, but maybe you're collaborating on a grant or a project that hasn't been published yet. So let us know if you're have a close either personal or professional relationship with the authors, or if you're working on something that's very similar to the thing that we're asking you to review and you feel like it's just a little too close. Those are some examples of conflicts. So decline to review if you have a conflict of interest, but if you're not sure, contact the editor and they can advise you. Please let us know who helped you with the work. If it's a postdoc or colleague, put their name in there so they can also get the credit. And in your review, be fair and constructive and be timely. If you're too busy to review, it's best to just decline rather than accepting and dragging things out. And confidential comments to the editor can be more candid, but they should match the tone of the comments to the authors. Telling the authors that their work is exciting and a major advance, and then telling the editors that you find it incremental will only lead to confusion for the authors. So this is just a summary of the important things to cover in your review. So start by summarizing the study and the question that the authors are addressing and the main models and results. Highlight the strengths of the study and tell us what you think about the level of advance. If you have concerns about the advance due to previously published work, please provide references. Highlight major concerns, but try to focus on issues necessary to support the main conclusions. Don't try to morph the paper into what you wish it was. Highlight any minor concerns and let us know if there are any issues with transparency of reporting. And keep in mind as you're doing this that the authors have likely spent years working on this paper. So be honest and constructive, but also be kind and respectful. Okay, next I just want to highlight some innovations and community building at Cell Press. So our website, cell.com, maintains a host of materials to enable researchers to optimize publication of their research. From the journal homepage, readers can freely access galleries such as the Cell Press Picture Show, which contains beautiful images, as well as Cell Press videos that describe various aspects of the publishing process or describe certain papers in detail from the authors, as well as podcasts and best of collections and special issues and more. In addition, at the article level, we've introduced several article enhancing elements such as star methods and figure 360. And we also introduced Sneak Peek, which is a preview of papers under review in our primary research journal pipeline, making papers discoverable earlier in the publication cycle so that authors can surface their research quickly and readers can build on their work. And as I mentioned, star methods was introduced several years ago to improve the transparency of methods, reporting, and reproducibility. Another resource is Cell Mentor, which is a new online resource that provides advice from editors on publishing your work, insights from scientists in the field, video tutorials, and more. And just a few other additional resources that I want to mention. As editors and publishers and trained researchers ourselves, we seek to continually support the collaborative connections between researchers. Our Crosstalk blog features a widespread selection of content, and Cell Symposia provide networking opportunities with short, compact programs that are curated by Cell Press editors. Lab links are free one-day symposia throughout the world, and Cell Press webinars focus on research topics versus this one on authoring and are introduced throughout the year. I also want to point out the free coronavirus resource from Elsevier and Cell Press and The Lancet. You can find all of our novel coronavirus papers here, and access to all of this content is free. For more information, please go to cell.com, and you can also recommend our journal to your library. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll now take the rest of the time that we have to answer some of the questions that you submitted. Okay, so the first question we have is, if a paper is poorly written but contains new data, is the possibility that it will be rejected very high? So this is going to what I was talking about, which is the editor is going to read the entire paper no matter what. But it can be difficult if your paper is really poorly written and it's hard to understand what the main point is, what you've done, then it is possible that your paper could get rejected because the message isn't coming through clearly. However, if if the paper is written well enough that it's understandable but maybe not written brilliantly, then that's fine. We will see through that writing, and we'll be able to send the paper for review. But again, it's best to try and make sure you can be as clear as possible so that there are no misunderstandings, and so that the paper has the best chance possible of getting sent out for review. So the next question is, how can I find the proper journal for my manuscript, and what features of the journal should I pay attention to? So the most important thing, I guess, first would be to decide, are you looking at a broad scope journal or a more specialized journal? So thinking about the type of advance that your paper provides and what level it sits at, and think about whether your advance is similar to the other types of advances that you see published in that journal, and whether it's a broad enough advance or whether it seems to be maybe more appropriate for a specialized journal. So look at the scope of the journal that you're publishing in, look at the papers that they publish. You can also get advice from colleagues. That can be helpful as well. And as I mentioned, you can make use of the pre-submission inquiry system. The next question is, do I need a lot of data to publish in a big journal? So it's not about how much data necessarily you have. What you want to be able to do is you need to have enough data to fully support your conclusions and to be able to make sure that what you're saying in your paper is actually backed up by the data. But many journals also do have a report format. So for example, Immunity publishes research articles, which typically consist of 6 or 7 figures. But we also have a report format for very exciting findings, things that are game-changing, things that have immediate therapeutic relevance. And those papers might only be 4 figures, or are usually 4 figures. So it's not necessarily about volume, but it's about, what's the question that you're asking, how important is it, and is your data sufficient to support the conclusions in your paper? What should I do if I revised and resubmitted my manuscript to a journal and they haven't given you feedback for over 12 months? So that seems very unusual to me. There's no reason really that a journal should have your paper sitting with them for 12 months. So if they haven't given you a decision, I would definitely contact the editor and ask for an update, and do this politely and let them know, I submitted my paper on such and such date. I haven't heard back. Can you please let me know what the status is? And they should be able to give you a status. But there's really no situation where the paper should be sitting with the journal for that long. Next question. After pre-submission approval, do I need to submit the paper within 2 weeks? Definitely not. If you send in a pre-sub and the journal says, yes, we're interested, there's really no timeline within which you have to submit that paper. Of course, be aware of, what else is being published in the field, and, whether something else is also being published in your particular topic that could undercut your work. But in general, there's no time limit within which you have to submit, especially not a 2-week time limit. If you receive approval for a pre-submission. If you wait, a year or 2, then yes, the state of the field may have changed. So that may be an issue, but not in the span of several weeks. Okay, what is the acceptance rate? So I don't know for every journal. For Immunity, I can tell you we probably send out about 30% of the papers for external review that we receive. And once the paper is reviewed, about half of those end up getting published in the journal. Next question is, what is your suggested length for the cover letter? Usually the cover letter should be a page long. You know, if it's a little longer, that's fine, a page and a half. But usually within a page to a page and a half or so, it shouldn't be more than 2 pages long. Okay, next question is, should every manuscript be attached with a cover letter? The answer is yes. You should always have a cover letter to go with your manuscript. This is really the place where you can be the most candid about, you know, why you think your paper is in advance, why you think it should be reviewed at the journal, you know, what's most important about your findings, put your findings into the context of the field. So you really should take advantage of having the cover letter. If your paper has a cover letter that's not great, again, we're still going to read the whole paper. So we're going to make these decisions based on the scientific content of your paper. So it won't kill your paper if you don't have a cover letter, but you're losing out on a chance to help your paper, basically, if you don't provide one. Let's see. So next question is, how should an abstract be different if the introduction, summary, findings, and suggestions are explained in the cover letter? So the abstract is going to be much more succinct. It's going to be, you know, usually around 150 words. So it's a very short summary of your work, ultimately, and it's very different than the introduction and cover letter, which can be have a different focus, which are longer, can give you more time to explain sort of other aspects of the work. But the abstract should really be sort of your pitch for your paper. So, you know, here's the topic I'm talking about. Here's, you know, a basic background. Here's the question we're addressing. This is what we did. This is what we think it means. All right. So next question, submitting to 2 journals at the same time is something new to me. Is this specific to Cell Press journals or a common practice by other publishers? To be honest, I'm not 100% sure about the other publishers. I don't know what their policies are on co-submissions. You can definitely look at the information for authors at other publishers and look at that. But for Cell Press, you can definitely submit a single paper to 2 Cell Press journals as long as you indicate that that's what you're doing. Obviously, it's not ethical to submit papers to multiple journals at the same time in any other context. So you can't submit a paper to Cell and Nature simultaneously. And you also can't submit a paper to Cell and Immunity simultaneously if you don't tell us that you're doing it. But we do have the special case with co-submissions where you can submit to 2 Cell Press journals simultaneously and inform them that you're doing this and ask for the paper to be co-considered. So this is definitely something that's available to you at Cell Press. Next question, which is a good one here, is there any journal in the Cell Press family for publishing clinical data? Yes, there is. First of all, most journals at this point, I think, are accepting clinical papers. So Cell has published clinical data. Med was launched recently, which I mentioned briefly, and that journal is very specifically in the clinical translational space, so that would be a very good option for you. Cell Reports Medicine is the cascading journal from Med, which is also very interested in clinical trials or clinical data, as well as translational data. But all journals are interested in this kind of data. So we're all interested in clinical trial data and clinical data. Let's see. when coming to a decision, is the editor responsible for the final decision? The answer is yes. Our decisions at Cell Press journals are all made at the editorial level. So we integrate the advice from reviewers, which is very important, especially in the technical aspects of the work. But fundamentally, the final decision is made by the editor when integrating all of the different aspects of the work. And as I mentioned, we do overrule reviewers. So there are times when a reviewer may say, you know, the paper's great, technically fine, but we don't think it's enough of an advance. But maybe we do think it's enough of an advance, and so we might overrule that reviewer. And we try in those situations to let the reviewer know that we made this decision, so at least that they feel that they've been we've heard their view, and we made a decision and sort of explained it a little. Let's see. Okay, so another person here has two questions. The first part is language, whether we can recommend some language review services. So Elsevier has a language editing service. So if you go to the Cell Press or Elsevier website, you should be able to find that. We can send an email. I think we can send you guys an email afterwards, so we can try and include the answer to this question with the link to the language editing service. If that's helpful. Second, what are the most common mistakes authors make while preparing their manuscript? I think that some of the most common mistakes that I see are, you know, again, these things aren't going to kill your paper, so I don't want to scare anyone. But usually, I'll tell you that even for papers we accept, at the end, Immunity does a round of editing, and we often I'll edit the title and the abstract. Guaranteed, because people are so good at knowing their own work. It's very hard for them to think about what an external person might think. So it's hard for them to write more broadly. So a lot of people, you know, I'll read abstracts and then I'll read the full paper, and I'll realize that some of the most important and interesting things from the paper actually never were in the abstract. And so that's what I think is always very difficult for people, is sort of separating out, you know, what you know and take for granted versus what are the important things to highlight for sort of a broader audience. So that's one of the things that we do often, is try and make sure that, you know, your exciting work that you've already done and spent all this time on actually does come through in the title and the abstract. Let's see. So question here is it enough to bring out to I think this question is whether it's mandatory to have a summary sentence at the end of each section in the results. It's definitely not mandatory, and it's just something that can help. It can help the readers get your main point. So especially for papers that are slightly out of people's fields, you know, it can be a very easy way to make sure that after you have described the results, that everyone understands what you're saying the conclusion is from that result. They may not agree, they may not think you have enough support for that, but at least they know, okay, this is what this author has said that they're taking from this set of experiments. Let's see. Someone here asked, I think they have a paper with one author, or is it better to have 2 or 3 authors, or how many? We don't pay attention to how many authors are on a paper. We've published papers with 2 authors. We've published papers with, you know, a consortium of 100 authors. None of that's relevant. The most important thing is, you know, is the work well done? And is it does it fit with the scope of the journal? Does it provide the level of advance we need? But the number of authors has no impact on what the eventual decision will be. Let's see here. The next question is, other reviewers say that you should not rewrite the methods if you elaborated in another paper. They encourage citing. So I'll tell you, for Cell Press, one of the issues I'm sure that you guys are aware of is it can be very difficult when you're reading the methods of a paper, and you read the paper, you go to the methods because you want to do these experiments, and they say, you know, this experiment was done as in, and they reference a paper. And so then you look up that paper, and you try and find the reference. You go to their methods section, and that paper references another paper. And you end up in this chain where you're going back and back and back, trying to find where someone actually described the actual method that you want. So the reason for STAR methods and saying you should at least briefly describe all methods in the section, in the STAR methods section, is that we want to avoid that from happening. We want people should be able to read your paper and you should be able to say, this is what I did. You can also cite the previous paper, which is totally fine, and we encourage. So you should definitely cite that in addition, but someone should be able to read just your paper and just your method section and understand everything that was done. So for Cell Press, I can't speak to other publishers, but for Cell Press, that's what we would recommend. And as I mentioned, the STAR method section does not count to your character count, and nor does the references section. So there's really no downside to being very clear about exactly what you did. And it'll help both the reviewers understand your paper, and it'll also help anyone who's reading it and trying to reproduce your results because they don't have to go on this sort of wild goose chase trying to find who actually did describe that method. Let's see. Someone asks here who can qualify as a reviewer. So different journals have different ways that they find reviewers. I can tell you a little bit about how we select reviewers. So obviously, when we look for reviewers, we're looking for people that are knowledgeable about the particular field that the paper is in. And we often will look for paper who've published in our journal previously or in journals in that tier, in our same tier of, of publications. So we're looking for people who sort of have a sense of what a typical immunity paper might be like. We're also looking for people with technical expertise in that area. And one way that we know these people is obviously through their publications. So that's one way that we will find reviewers. Another way is that we go to conferences and meetings and we do lab visits or institute visits where we meet with a whole bunch of people. And so that can also introduce us to new reviewers. A lot of times I'll have people who, were postdocs and published a paper with us, and I see that they've gotten their own lab. And so that's another way that we find reviewers, people we've interacted with in the past. But those are the main things we're looking for is, what's your expertise, and do you have experience sort of publishing in that sort of tier of the journal, the family of that journal. Let's see. How many days will it take to publish a paper if everything goes well? So there's no, again, it's hard to have a very typical situation. Things are very different. Usually I can tell you sort of what the process breaks down into. So usually after you submit a paper, the initial decision of whether to reject or review it is made within 3 to 5 days. So let's say there's, let's give that a week. And then reviewing the paper, we, let's say 3 weeks to a month on average. So then we're talking around a month for the first initial round of review. I have had a situation where after the first round of review, everyone thought the paper was ready to accept. So in that situation, let's say we've gone through a month, the reviewers are all happy, they just want some minor textual revisions. And so then the paper could be online, within a few weeks later. So that would give you, 7-8 weeks before the paper is published. Obviously, in most cases, that's not how it goes. Most situations, when you get the reviews back, there is a revision process, and that process can obviously vary in length. We try and make sure that the revision process is reasonable if we're inviting a revision. We don't want to ask you to do a revision that's going to take you 5 years. That doesn't really make sense for anyone. So that's something we're trying to gauge when we decide what decision to send out. But yeah, I mean, things can be very speedy. Obviously, also, there are special situations. So when Zika was happening, and right now with COVID-19, we're trying to expedite these papers, get them reviewed really quickly, get them published online even before they're, proof copy edited or styled into a PDF. And so for some of those papers, I think they're coming on, probably very quickly. Let's see. Okay, so the next question, should the cover letter be the same throughout the whole process of the publishing process? So the cover letter will likely change. The initial cover letter, as I described, is sort of more helping us understand, the advance of the paper, the main findings of the paper, that kind of thing. When you're revising, usually the cover letter will shift at that point to sort of summarize, some of the revisions or highlight any issues that you had during the revision process, maybe give a quick summary of the main issues that we flagged that you think you've addressed, that kind of thing. And then at the final stages, let's say your paper's been accepted, then maybe the cover letter will just address some of the editorial changes that we asked for. So usually the cover letter will change throughout the process, but the cover letter is probably most important at the initial submission stage. Next question is, how many external reviewers do you have before publishing the manuscript? So usually 2 to 3 reviewers. Our standard is probably 3 reviewers, but we do occasionally have 2 reviewers on a manuscript. Occasionally we have more. Some of this depends on, how interdisciplinary the paper is. Sometimes if a paper is on, sometimes if the paper is, cutting across many different fields, we may need, 4 reviewers in order to cover all of the technical aspects of the work, as well as the, conceptual aspects of the work. But on average, I'd say usually 3 reviewers is what we go to. Okay, the next question is, if we have a paper ready, can we submit the paper to a few related journals, or once it's with one journal, can we not share it with another? So the answer is, once you submit it to one journal, you cannot submit it to any other journals, unless you're in the special co-submission that I mentioned. But generally, publishing ethics says you can only be under consideration at a single journal at a time. So once you submit your first paper to one journal, you have to wait for an actual final decision before you take it elsewhere. At the pre-submission stage, if you want to send sort of the abstract cover letter type inquiry, that you can send to as many journals as you want, and there's no obligation to go with any specific journal. So that's perfectly fine, because that's just sort of a quick check-in. It doesn't obligate you to submit anywhere. It doesn't prevent you from getting feedback from other people before you've officially submitted the paper. Okay, so next question is it true that if an author has many high impact factor papers published, then the chances of acceptance of the next publication is high? There's no relationship between the previous work and the current work. So the fact that an author had a high level publication initially doesn't mean that their next publication will automatically be, considered at a higher level. Every paper is sort of looked at individually in the context of the field and what's published in the field. So no, it doesn't mean that just because someone had a Cell paper, the next paper will be a Cell paper. It's all done on an individual level. All right. Do you care whether an article is rejected before or not? So overall, the answer to that is no. We're gonna look at every paper and the fit for our specific journal. So we obviously know that there are papers that are rejected from Cell or rejected from Nature that come to us. but they have a different scope than us, they have a different level than us, so it doesn't mean that a paper rejected from Nature might not be a great fit for Immunity. So it's totally fine. I would recommend that in your cover letter, you do change the word Nature to Immunity to reflect the journal that you're actually submitting to, because it is always a funny thing to read a paper, read a cover letter that says, we're very excited to submit to Nature Immunology when they're submitting to Immunity. So again, it still doesn't matter. I review papers that I see those cover letters from, so it's not going to affect anything, but it's just sort of, being careful about how you write as usual. But yeah, a rejection of another journal does not mean that the journal wouldn't, the paper wouldn't be a good fit for us. So how are minor versus major revisions defined? Does the need for additional experiments automatically lead to major revisions? So usually minor revisions are definitely given to papers where the revisions are textual. There are times when when experiments are necessary for a minor revision decision, but they're very minimal or very easy, or it's just some reanalysis of some data, let's say, if it's some computational reanalysis and it doesn't involve, months of breeding mice or something. So it's not necessarily that a minor revision never has any new data that's required. The timeline is, for a minor revision, we're usually thinking around 2 weeks. And again, none of these timelines are super strict, but we're usually thinking minor revisions is around 2 weeks. Major revision is more like 2 months. And so that's usually what we're looking at is, do we think that this will be something that's very quick, or do we think that this might take a little time? And so that's usually how we decide sort of major versus minor revisions. Next question is, Cell Press accepting COVID-19 manuscripts or personal opinions? We're definitely interested in COVID-19 papers. So a number of journals have been publishing them. We also are publishing, reviews and previews and other content. We commission a lot of these pieces ourselves, so it's a little less, if it's a personal opinion, it's a little less likely that we'll accept it sort of unsolicited, because we tend to go to experts in the field that we want to write about specific topics in that case. But we're definitely interested in primary research papers, and we're trying to process these very quickly. And again, if you have any questions, you can always submit a pre-submission inquiry, and we'll get back to you quickly on whether we think it's worthwhile to prepare a full sort of perspective or opinion piece for us. So one question here is, what Cell Press journal would be appropriate to submit interdisciplinary research? So one of the goals of the journal iScience, which is also an open access journal, is interdisciplinary research. So I would encourage you to look at that journal and look at the scope and sort of what they're publishing, but that's definitely one of their goals. It depends on how interdisciplinary you mean. Obviously, I work at Immunity, we focus on immunology, but we touch a lot of different fields. A lot of different fields are integrated right now. So we publish papers that are immunometabolism, we publish neuroimmunology, we publish cancer immunotherapy. So a lot of this type of work is very interdisciplinary to begin with. But iScience is definitely specifically sort of targeting that interdisciplinary work. What are the roles of peer reviewers in the final decision? So peer reviewers, they provide their recommendations to us. They tell us what they think about the quality and rigor of the paper, about the significance, the technical aspects. We often, will go back to them if we have questions about specific aspects of the work, but ultimately the final decision does lie with the editors. So the peer reviewers will give us their recommendations, and and the editors will make the final decision. Someone asked here, what should I do if the editorial journal did not respond on withdrawing my manuscript? The best thing to do in that case is to email the journal, email the editor or the journal inbox, and ask them again to withdraw the manuscript, and just, just ask them politely and tell them that you've tried to do this previously and it hasn't been done, and ask that they do it. Okay, the next question is our manuscript sent to all of the suggested reviewers? So it's unlikely that we'll send it to every reviewer you suggest. If you suggest 3 reviewers, sometimes people, I look at the reviewer suggestions and those are actually the exact people I would have gone to anyways, and so I might use 1 or 2 of them. Other times, I don't use any of them because they're not maybe at the level that we want them to be, or not quite the right expertise. Other times it can be really helpful because maybe there's someone who's working on an aspect of, working on a particular topic that I actually didn't know was working on that topic. So I might try them out along with other reviewers that I know really well. So overall, unlikely that we'll use all 3, but possible that we might use, 1 of those suggestions. Let's see. So someone says, new researchers writing their first paper from a PhD often do make sloppy mistakes. Is this considered in terms of their junior position? Unfortunately, no matter what, everyone's sort of held to the high standard, the same standard, which is if you're submitting a paper, the editors and the reviewers expect that you've taken the care to do everything properly, to write everything out properly, and to make sure that your figures are accurate and not duplicated. So even if it's your first paper, the best course might be to make sure that you have someone more senior perhaps take a look at the paper and make sure that you're not making any of these sloppy mistakes, because it can really impact how the reviewers feel about the paper if they think that, you haven't been very careful and there are a lot of errors, and it can start to make them question, how strong your data is if there are a whole bunch of duplications and mistakes. So definitely better to get someone to look at the manuscript and help you to make sure that there's no major issues. Okay, does submitting a paper from a less-known university affect the decision process? It does not. To be honest, for the most part, I actually don't look at where the authors are from until I'm inviting reviewers, at which point I need to make sure that I don't invite anyone from that same institute. But we don't make decisions based on where papers are from. Our goal is always to publish the best science, and anything that limits that, trying to give preference to certain people or certain institutes really hampers that goal. So our goal is, we don't care where you're from or who you are. We want to publish the best science, and we want to make sure that, everyone has an equal and fair shot. So let's see. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through here. So someone asked how they should submit their pre-submission inquiries. So it varies by journal, but there's basically 2 ways to do it. Some journals will let you do it via the editorial manager website. So at Immunity, you can go, as if you were submitting your paper, you would basically go into the system, and instead of submitting an article, you would select pre-submission inquiry, and then you could copy and paste all the information into there. You can also email your pre-submission inquiry to an editor at the journal, particularly if you've had some interaction with an editor. So maybe you met, maybe you talked to me at a meeting and, now have work that you want to submit. You can email me directly and I'll handle that. I'll discuss it with the team and handle it that way. So those are the main ways. It's best to check the journal information for authors to see how your particular journal that you're submitting to handles those pre-submission inquiries. All right. I think we're actually almost out of time here. Let me see if I can find one more. How do you deal with work that's scooped during the revision process, or when papers are discussing similar findings around the same time? So we try and be generous about this. Obviously, you know, if you're in the revision process with us and then a paper comes out, you know, in another journal, like right before you're ready to resubmit, we'll usually, you know, let us know as soon as it happens, and we'll try and work with you to try and expedite your paper the best we can. So we try not to, especially when you're at the revision stage, you've already gone through, you know, a round of peer review and we've invited a revision. We try not to sort of make these kinds of, you know, all or nothing decisions at that stage, and we'll try and work with you to try and sort of streamline things as much as possible. And usually, you know, if there's a paper that comes out in January and your paper is going to come out in February, it's usually not a big deal in the long run. So we'll try our best to help you out. But do email your editor as soon as possible and let us know about the situation so that we can help you deal with that in the best way possible. All right. Let's see. Sorry, just doing a time check. All right. So someone here asks, if we can reveal salient and important results with around 30 patients and 40 controls, will this limit our chance to publish in top journals? So these are also things that are very much based on what you're trying to say with that data. So, you know, overall, there are times when, you know, papers have very few patients, but they can still make conclusions. There are times when you need, you know, a much larger data set to make conclusions. So it really does depend on sort of what you're trying to get out of this data set. I definitely wouldn't say, you know, 30 to 40 sounds like a decent number. So it sounds like something you could do something with. I wouldn't say that that number immediately would, you know, inhibit you from being able to publish in a top tier journal, but it really does matter, you know, what you're trying to do and what the actual details are of the manuscript. But usually I'd say, you know, because it's so specific to each paper, I wouldn't say, you know, don't even bother submitting unless you have X number of patients. It's not something that we can sort of put a number on like that. All right, I'm trying to take one final question here. Okay, so here's a relevant one. How's the timeline for manuscript review and revisions managed now due to COVID-19 research and the shutdown of laboratories? So this is definitely a major issue. Obviously, we know that most people can't do revisions right now. And so we're trying to do this in two ways. First, we're very flexible about revision timelines. So if you submit a paper and we say, you know, here's what you need to do for revision, we're not going to cut you off. We're going to try and give you as much time as possible for when labs reopen to try and get that done. The other thing we're trying to do is prioritize what really needs to be done for that revision. So once you get your comments back, please get in touch with your editor to try and discuss a revision plan, and we'll try and formulate something with you that hopefully can take into account the fact that you can't do a lot of work right now. Okay, I think I'm almost out of time here, so I just want to thank everyone again for coming to this webinar and for your attention and for all of your great questions. And I hope that you found this helpful and look forward to interacting with you all again in the future. Thank you.